please. So if you've been coming along to all our meetings, building up your HIST frequent flyer miles on your HIST card in the hope of getting an exotic trip to UCD, you'll have noticed the kind of trajectory our debates have been going on, where we started off with Joseph Stiglitz talking about African youth, we moved on to youth in America, and last week we ended up with euthanasia. Boom, boom. And this week the trip finishes in the YMCA. An ordinary public business meeting of the College Historical Society took place on the 21st of October 2009. The motion was that this House would legalise euthanasia. I wasn't actually there, which kind of makes a mockery of this whole ritual. If we lived in a decent society, I would be able to end this hollow shell of a minutes with dignity. But we don't, so I'll carry on. When I was called on to write these minutes, I thought there was nothing funny about assisted suicide. Then I dug deep into Edmund Burke's joke book. So a man and his wife are sitting in the living room, and the man says, "Just so you know, dear, I never want to live in a vegetative state, dependent on some machine and fluids from a bottle." So wait, she unplugs the TV and pours out his beer. You're right, there is nothing funny about euthanasia. There being no further business, the meeting adjourned.
Thank you. Are there any objections to me signing these minutes as a true and accurate account of the last public business meeting? There being none, I will duly sign.
Okay, welcome to the fifth debate of term on the motion that this House believes that the gay community perpetuates a negative stereotype. Before we begin, I'd just like to point out that we have the oratory returns forms and everybody on everybody's seat. What this is basically is a way of adjudicating on how well people are speaking in the chamber throughout the year. So the guidelines are here on the inside, and if you'd be kind enough to write out the person's name and what you think they deserved out of 100 and hand them to Bella, who's standing there at the end of the debate, we'd be very appreciative. We also, I'm going to just give a bit of details about the order of business for this debate. After the first minute, you might hear which means that you can ask or make a point of information to the person speaking. If you want to make a point of information, stand up and say "sir" or "on that point," and hand on head or something like that. There's different ways. And then after between 5 and 7 minutes, depending on whether it's a guest speaker or a student speaker, you'll hear it again. And then at the very end, you will hear a double bell like so. So that's just to give you an idea of the order of business. So with that, I'd just like to introduce the speakers that are here. Yes, I've already said. On the proposition, we have Mr. Joe O'Gorman, who's the honorary treasurer of the CSC. No.
Find the God in it to say it.
In opposition, we have Mr. Ross Higgins, who's a former member of the Gay Community News Board of Directors. Our temporary standing chair and also an opposition speaker is Mr. Rowan Hodson, who's the president of the Graduate Students' Union. I'll move it back to the chair so we can start the meeting.
So, as Jamie said, the notion is that this House believes that the gay community perpetuates a negative stereotype, and I can invite the first speaker in the proposition, Barry Cahill.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. I'm speaking here as on the proposition as the token straight male. Well, I'm fairly straight, just the lad I rode last week, made sure I put in that fairly. I want to talk about this debate framed in this idea that we're all aware that there's a high propensity in this debate for people to get quite offended. Joe's laughing because quite offended is perhaps an understatement. But when I talk about negative stereotypes, can I just do a straw poll? Like, how many people here would like to have other people believe that, say, they frequently have unprotected sex, or they are sexually promiscuous to the extent that they can't hold down a serious relationship? Or
I'd like people to believe it.
or that they're stupid. This is one thing.
Really stupid to have undertaken.
Getting kind of circular here, Joe.
That's what I aim for.
It's going to be a long night.
Yeah, everything you say will be taken up the wrong way. Get on.
Okay. But ultimately, like, there is this big thing. The way I see it, there are three groups in this. There are the general public, intolerant as they are. There is what would be considered by most in this room as the core gay community, and then there are other gay people. And I think this is where the lines in this debate have been drawn between other gay people and the core gay community, who are, on the whole, represented.
Oh dear God.
Represented by. It's a break here, Joe. Who are generally represented by, say, the GCN or say active gay bars within the Dublin framework. Say GCN. I'll just use that as an example, or the more active gay bars. Why I was kind of motivated to speak was largely because none of my friends who are gay are very active in that community, and I just think for a lot of people it's and one of the biggest problems that we have with the degree of intolerance in this country is that when you look at the kind of exposure that the gay community gets on an annual basis, it's generally things like Pride or LGBT noise that are picked up by the media. And when I was over in San Francisco over the summer at the Pride Festival, and I'm using this as an extreme example, but I mean, there was this midget in a gimp mask on a leash beside me, and I mean, the cameras were obviously panning to him quite frequently. No thanks, Steve. And I mean, it really, the media are quite frequently going to do this. It's a better story. It's a bit more interesting. It's a bit more out there. I don't think it's representative at all. I don't think there's many people in this room who would think that's representative. But my main thing here, what I want to talk about, is what gives me a source of pride about the gay community, is that there are just some truly inspirational things about it. Young men and women who come out in particularly difficult environments. It's just really, really inspirational. The fact that the gay community, or any definition of the gay community, would consider itself to be tolerant of the widest scope of individuals, that anyone can be, like, anyone, regardless of how they live, should be treated like a human being. And that's a truly inspirational thing. But the fact that there's this division that still exists because people are allowing themselves to be typecast as this particularly, say, camp homosexual, that when, say, Stephen Gately died, he had an obituary. It was quite a nice obituary. But for a lot of people, what they saw in the outside world was Stephen Gately, gay, paint your own picture. My mum, the intolerant wench she is, before the post-mortem happened, no thanks, before the post-mortem happened, she was like, oh yeah, he was gay. There's probably, some mad stuff like auto-asphyxiation or something involved, probably some foul play. Which is funny because my Uncle Jim came out there a few years ago. To which I just kind of responded, you have to hug him at Christmas, you bigot. But when there are so many people out there who will just paint their own picture and rarely have these people in their community, in their village, these brothers and uncles who are gay and who are ordinary under that ordinary definition, to allow the camera to pan to the midget in the gimp suit so frequently, to allow, say, in Will and Grace, for example, for most people to think that more people are like Jack than Will, and this idea of performativity, that gay people are represented by individuals who are the most camp of the entire gay population. And when you consider this idea of performativity, where it stems from, is that it is a theatrical idea. That these attributes are the most extreme attributes for the purpose of theatre. This degree of campness is to the extent of to the extent of mockery. I mean, it's kind of human nature to draw things as black and white. Sorry, you're out of order there. It is human nature to draw these things as black and white and to say that that person is different to me because they're this extreme example. I can't relate to that. And when we're talking about tolerance, I'm not saying like move towards the centre, be more normal. I mean, I take pride in the fact that the gay movement is founded on this idea as be individual as you are, but to define yourself only as being a member of this broad parish is perhaps the wrong word, but to define yourself as a member and be defined by that doesn't take into account the fact that you're also a huge number of other things. So I mean, when the media does pan to the most extreme aspects of the gay population, i.e. what I'm framing as the gay community, it's just quite problematic for people integrating, for the person who's not in any way camp at all, or in any way involved in this degree of performativity. It makes it more difficult for them to come out. And I think it's just, in a lot of ways, a really double-edged sword. It will unite the community, but it'll also drag it apart. It makes it harder for people to come out. So.
And I've created the indulgence of the committee if you'd like to make a personal statement to explain why I'm late and to apologise to the first speaker, but I really would not wish to be discourteous, and I really would have liked to hear what was said. But it's partly due to the disorganisation of business in the channel at the moment. We were not supposed to sit this week because of now this committee, but because of the hell of a row last week about us not sitting, they decided they would sit at the last minute, and then they moved the time of private members' debate, which is a very important debate. It fell to the independent senators, and the vote was moved from 7 o'clock to 7:30. And since it was my colleague Shane Ross and Joe too, who had brilliantly filched a bill from the Green Party, registered in their own names, and forced the Greens to vote against it, I felt that it would be extremely disloyal to my paid employment not to turn up at the Leinster House and vote on that bill. And it gave me the opportunity to wave something around and say, in terms of openness, transparency and accountability, I today received a special supplementary budget ahead announcing 200,000 for the Irish Service, which is, as I said, 10 years ago, the same thing, an oxymoron. You can talk about Irish Service, none of them keep it secret, and it is a contradiction in terms like its counterpart, British intelligence. So I hope you'll forgive me. I do apologise, but I felt it was professionally necessary to be something else. So I hope I'll be indulged in this. I now call, I'd like to call now the first speaker in the opposition, Mr. William Quill.
Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. In terms of the perspective I'm coming from this, it's both as a Conservative and a Liberal. As a Conservative, I think there are certain things that are inevitable about human nature, and I think this is something you can't go on and on about worrying about every little thing that some gay person is doing and saying, is this creating a stereotype? But I want to get on to this later. And then, but more specifically, as a Liberal, that I do see this trend of progress. And I mean, I wouldn't believe in capitalism if it wasn't optimistic. So, and it's in the same way on this issue. There is this growing support. Whatever was raised earlier on, or what will be raised, about how people react to things. There is a growing change in support for marriage equality, for example. And this despite the continuing of gay pride parades. And people can see with the number of European countries and US states that have gone ahead with marriage equality, that this isn't, that like the society isn't falling apart. But what people don't actually, this is talking about the gay community, so what people often don't realise is that the idea of marriage equality was at one point a minority view within the gay community. And there's this change here, as in my own maiden speech was actually, and David Norris and Ross Higgins were both there. It was 5 years ago now, but it was, I talked about the fact that, say, in ancient Greece you had Achilles and Patroclus, and that the biblical... all right. The biblical David and Jonathan had managed to have a loving relationship without an institution of marriage, which was something that annoyed one of the other first years at the time, who was hoping to make a particularly regressive speech. But I was just trying to make the point that things weren't all bad. Again, this kind of idea of optimism. People have really... But at the same... Andrew Sullivan, from an English man a conservative who writes in America, found when he first came out with this idea of marriage, he was criticised for being too conservative, for being a conservative institution. And when people see the gay, if you see the gay pride parades now, this isn't about creating a separate identity. It's about asking for rights, asking for, again, a simple conservative institution to be allowed to have a family. And I think when people in general think of gay people, I think less and less of these stereotypes. I mean, the internet advertising talked about Perez Hilton, and I barely know who Perez Hilton is, some gossip blogger or something. But let's take in England, they had the Independence on Sunday's pink list released in the summer. And then what was interesting, what they said at the beginning of this, they're not even sure whether there should be such a list anymore. And they're actually thinking this could be one of the last times they do it, because it's become so much not an issue. When you have the first person they had at the top of it was Peter Mandelson, who's the most powerful politician in the British cabinet. And and then like the number of Tories equally that are on the list, which, I mean, from a historical perspective, isn't surprising when you consider that the three bachelors that became Prime Minister, William Pitt, Arthur Balfour and Edward Heath, were all Conservatives. But I mean, you see, like across there, you've got Barney Frank, who's the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, who's one of the most influential people, the new Prime Minister of Iceland, Johanna, and then and it's not just that I like someone like a politician because he's gay, and that's a good thing. And take in the case of the new foreign minister in Germany, Guido Westerwelle, it matters far more to me that he's one of the Liberals and he's going to be promoting this idea of cutting public expenditure, and he's someone like me, except he's over in Germany. And German-speaking people when they think of a gay person at the moment, they think of far more of him than of the fictional character who's on posters outside. And like these are outside examples, but you get, for example, there's Colin O'Gorman, who's briefly a PD senator, and when Miriam McCallum had a programme interviewing partners, whether in business or families, whatever, he was there with his partner, just as one of the any other partner there. And if these people when people talk about the gay community, to focus simply on pride or on the midget that Barry was talking about, well, why do we look at that rather than on what are the things that are really getting to people now? But even in terms of this, yes, like there are activists who, the main focus, they spend their time thinking about gay rights issues. Like most of their writing is on these things. But it kind of has to be that. There have to be some people like that. For example, my Senator Norris is a good case. And in our first debate here, we had Catherine Sapone and Anne-Louise Gilligan, who spend their time concerned about the fact that they and others don't have the right to marry. So if they don't take there's like an old saying that we'll give people their rights when they petition for them. It's all, obviously in principle everyone should have their rights, but it shouldn't depend on the fact that for people to realise that otherwise. I'll take your point, yeah. No, I don't think so. I think this is seeping through. I think more and more when people, nothing happens overnight. Change does happen slowly, especially when it comes to people's perceptions of things. And then when it comes to the gay scene, I mean, I think of the Serenity Prayer. There's, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think this is one of the things that, when people think about the gay scene, there's nothing you can't get you can't get rid of that, because if you think of, there are different types of pubs. Later on we go to your group of friends pubs and circles, and then or there's the old man pub, and then there are lots of pubs or nightclubs that people go to just to randomly score people, and straight people do this just as much as gay people. So I don't see, and there's this whole there's a laddish culture that's out there. People stories. I woke up, I didn't know what her name was. So this, when people that's not going to change, no matter how much it concerns people. I think, and even the people like to randomly score people, they don't want to first try to find out, waste the time finding out if they're that person's type. So it just makes that kind of thing a lot easier. So there's no way you're going to get rid of the gay pubs, no matter how much people are integrated. And I think what really matters is the change in perception. There's a slow change in perception. But we see this in the media. But this isn't it's something that, and I think people have to be realistic about this. But I mean, I think people do kind of have to matter far less about pride. Personally, I think the idea of gay pride matters as little as straight pride. I mean, as short pride. I was talking to Ciara and Ursula earlier on about this, about being short. It's not as if that's something particular, but the focus is more and more on simply the ideas of rights and equality. But the other aspects can't be got rid of either. So I think just people have to be realistic about this. Thank you.
If anybody would like to make an impromptu speech for about 3 or 5 minutes, if they'd like to put their name forward on a piece of paper to the table, we'll try to put them in at the end. Thank you.
I now get the pleasure of calling the second speaker of the proposition, Mr. Niall Sherry.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society. Okay, to my mind, this debate kind of comes down to how much of a responsibility you have to act in a particular way if you're representing a minority. This isn't about what gay people do or don't do on a daily basis. This isn't about straight people perpetuating a negative image of other straight people by going out and having random sex with people of the opposite sex. This isn't even about the midget in a gimp mask on the other 364 days of the year. This is about how people act and how we portray ourselves and how we accept portrayals of ourselves in the days when we're in a gay pride parade, in the days when we say actually it's okay to have images of ourselves in the media that perpetuate every single stereotype that are true for some people but aren't true for many, many more. It's about every time that we say, yeah, gay bar is actually pretty okay. I'm going to have a bit of a rant about most of those later. But I think it's important to establish first that there is a massive disconnect between the gay community, which is the core of people who organise the Pride Parade and who are activists and who actively. What's the word? What's the verb for activist? They try to push for rights. They organise marches, they organise the Pride Parade, they do all that kind of stuff. Agitate. Thank you, Senator. They agitate for rights, and between 90% of other gay people in the country, or more accurately 80%. Because if you look at the Pride Parade in 2009, the organisers claimed that 12,000 people went, which means that actually about 8,000 or 9,000 people went. And considering, considering that there's 2 million people in the Greater Dublin area, of whom 1.5 million are over the age of 18, and even going by the most conservative of statistics, that means that you're looking at a minimum of 50,000 people who would identify with some element of LGBT. That 80% of those don't feel connected, that 80% of them don't bother turning out for what should be the event, for people who wish to express some kind of pride in their sexuality, the event for people who feel any involvement with the community. That surely demonstrates some disconnect between the gay community as it stands and actual gay people. The reason why I think this is important, is that it's especially important for the gay community more than any other minority group to be inclusive and to be representative, because unlike any other minority group who've been pushing for rights, most gay people don't have to face discrimination on a daily basis. Black people in America in the 1960s couldn't be white acting. Women couldn't put on a beard and a deep voice and go and vote that way. Other minorities and other oppressed groups have had to face discrimination on a daily basis. The fact that most gay people don't have to do that means that it's much easier to opt out of the gay community, much easier to just sit back and let discrimination happen to other people. The gay community needs, for its own sake and for the sake of every gay person, to try and be more inclusive, to try and be more representative of the average gay person who isn't represented at the moment. Like, it's important in terms of the image that straight people have as well. Because, look at Donald Cusack coming out last weekend. Like, everyone looked at him and went, Jesus, Mary, it's one of them gays playing sports. Like, would you ever have pictured it? And surely that speaks to the image that 90% of people have of gay people. And, I assume that most people in this room have some interest, in the issue as a whole. So I'd assume that most people in this room have something of a skewed viewpoint. But the fact that it's such a huge deal for somebody who actually plays sport to come out of the closet, the concept that somebody who can hit a small ball with a stick could actually have sex with other men, is astounding to the vast majority of people in Ireland. And the reason for that is that there is still a hugely backward view in almost the entire country of what gay people are like, and of how gay people act, and of what gay people can do with their lives. Niamh.
The GAA supported Bilbo, his teammates supported him, and the small radio stations in Munster supported him in his student effect.
Okay, hairdresser comes out. Do they get the front page of every newspaper in the country and the Late Late Show? People were supportive, but people were astounded. Because most people in this country don't accept that gay people can be anything other than entertainers or hairdressers. And it's shocking, and it's appalling. No, thank you, Jamie. But that's the view that people have. And the problem is that we don't do anything, by and large, to properly combat that. The Pride Parade, to my mind, should have changed in focus over the years. It was originally about the idea of, we're here, we're queer, get used to it. It was about making ourselves be different. It was about refusing to be pushed into any kind of heteronormative view of how we ought to act, refusing to allow ourselves to have our sexuality criminalized. And that was great. But those times have passed. We've moved on from wanting tolerance to wanting full acceptance. We've moved on from the place where we say, we're different and you ought to accept our differences, to saying, we're just like you and we ought to be allowed to get married, we ought to be allowed to adopt. And for better or worse, a huge part of that ever coming about relies on the vast majority of this country who are straight and who are somewhat backward and who live in rural areas and who haven't met gay people for most of their lives. That huge part of that relies on them having a view of gay people as being just like them. If you think that the Pride Parade in its current form fully represents that, then fine, you'll completely disagree with what I'm saying. If, like me, you think that it reinforces some of the more, I don't want to say that they're bad stereotypes, but they are the more stereotypical views of gay people are completely reinforced by the Pride Parade, are completely reinforced by most things that the gay community does. If you think that that's okay, it's fine to be a midget wearing a gimp mask on any other day of the year. On the day when you're purporting to represent every gay person in the country, on the day when you're saying, we are gay people, here we are, you have a responsibility to do what's going to be best for the community as a whole. And I don't think that's being a midget wearing a gimp mask. Particularly in terms of gay bars, because these kind of represent every problem that I have with how the gay community in Ireland is, with how we act, with how we treat ourselves. The idea that we segregate ourselves into individual bars where the idea is that you don't do anything with a member of the same gender in other bars because you have your place and that's where you're meant to go. If you're going to do your sordid little things, it's fine in your bedroom, it's fine in the bars that we've set aside for you, but in 99% of Dublin pubs, you shouldn't really be doing that. Wouldn't you ever head off to the George like a good little gay? I find them disgusting on a personal level because it's the only place in Ireland where I've ever had any issue because of my sexuality, specifically not being let in because I didn't look gay enough. Yeah, I know. On a more general level, I think it's appalling that we continue to indulge in self-segregation. I think it's appalling that we agree to put ourselves in a box, to say, actually, we'll keep all of our business out of your bars, and we'll go to our own place and do our own thing. I think that if we ever want to achieve any kind of equal rights, we need to make ourselves properly integrated. We need to show straight people that we are just them, except that we also like to shag people of the same gender. That there's no other intrinsic difference to being gay beyond who you want to have sex with. That there's no lifestyle, nothing that makes you different beyond who you fall in love with. Like, the gay community again and again reinforces the idea that we're different and that we're separate and that there's something about our orientation that is more than our orientation, that our orientation in some way influences our lifestyle and ourselves in anything other than sex. That's just not true. Until such time as the gay community stops perpetuating that image, until such time as we stop accepting that, we don't deserve any better. Ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, Mr. Auditor, Distinguished Chair, Joseph. If you'll permit me, I'm not particularly good at public speaker, so I have some prompts prepared. I have fewer prompts prepared than usual. I'm actually a dreadful public speaker. I usually have everything I'm going to say written out to the last letter. But this is actually a topic that saturates me to the very core of my consciousness, so I'm trusting my ability to extemporize just this once. So if I ramble a bit, do forgive me. It's extremely difficult to follow such a good and such an energetic and enthusiastic and honestly meant speech as the one Niall has just delivered. But the fact is that Niall is completely and utterly wrong. And so I aim just to try to wheedle out some of the misconceptions that lie at the heart of his attitude to this issue. And it is an extremely important one. Somebody in my position, I'm a member of the LGBT Society, and I have some prominence in the gay community in general. I argue against attitudes that I find abominable all the time. And that's easy, because you can just resign yourself to the idea that they're idiots, that they're bigots, that they're fundamentalists, and it doesn't affect one emotionally. It becomes difficult when the people you're arguing against are your own brothers and sisters, the people engaged in exactly the same battle. And so this is the kind of thing that really energizes the way I think about the gay community, in a way that the ordinary Bible bashing doesn't really affect me. So I'll just let me forage into this and see if I can come out with any sense. The gay community perpetuates countless stereotypes. To say that it perpetuates just one is to do a huge injustice. The whole pantheon of mythical personas, all of which to some extent grounded solidly in demonstrable fact. The difficulty is describing any one of them as negative. I mean, what is negative about any given stereotype? For most gay men who dislike the idea of gay pride or who find the whole gay scene unappetizing, it simply comes down to femininity, camp, limp-wristedness. The idea that all straight people think all gay men are drag queens. That's a huge problem for a lot of people. And it's a huge problem for me that that's a huge problem for a lot of people, because I'm a member of the society that's called the LGBT. The last letter stands for transgender. The idea that anybody could find the idea that somebody has a split gender personality, who has a leaning towards a gender identity that isn't reflected in their own anatomy, is problematic to me. So let's just agree upon that before we move forward. It isn't inherently bad for a man to be effeminate, okay? I'm not even going to deal with the idea that that is an inherent wrong. Let's move on. The idea that we're all promiscuous. Well, that may or may not be true, but if it is, it's a monster created by heteronormative oppression and exclusion from things like marriage, which is the function of which is to settle people down. Are we materialistic? Possibly, because we've got no children to spend money on. Do we take more drugs than people? I'm sure Ross might give us some statistics on that later, but or personal experience. But I mean, deprived of the rights and recognitions afforded to everybody else as they progress through life into maturity, anyone would languish in this unending adolescence and hedonism. Deprived of a place in society, of a role, of a value, what else is there to do but to drink and shop and shag your way to a beautiful and premature death? So, if we are monstrous people, if we are instantiations of some grotesque stereotype, it's everybody else's fault. Is it even possible for a community to perpetuate a stereotype? I think that's a kind of a contradiction in terms. A stereotype is a singular instantiation of an image that pertains to a community. If the community itself is perpetuating it, it isn't a stereotype, it's real, it's there. You all know the camp gay men, the promiscuous gay men, the drug-taking gay men, the gay men who go out and dress as women. You all know the slightly more butch female, the butch lesbians, the ones with their cats in their bungalows. They exist. It isn't a stereotype if it's real. But it's not really about a community stereotype. What we're actually talking about is a word. I've learned a couple of new words today. Performativity. That was a new one on me. I'm going to say that this debate isn't about community. It isn't about stereotype. It's about conformity. And the idea that some people have, for some reason, gay people shouldn't be allowed to conform. Everybody conforms. You all conform in one way or another, whether or not you realise it. Every community, every subset of people has cliques, has trends, has affectations, and they conform to them. It's genetic. It's how society binds itself together. Now, the more enlightened, independent-minded of us might like to think that we transcend that, and for some people that may be true. But you all seem to think that the gay community should be peopled exclusively by moral philosophers. The fact that gay people sometimes succumb to a little extra shimmy or a little extra camp mince or the occasional tight t-shirt speaks ill of them in a way. It doesn't speak ill of people who listen to hip-hop music and wear baggy jeans or limp for no reason, or people who study best and do that weird thing with their hair where they tie a band around the middle and push it up and down. Conformity is rife in all levels of society, and we can't criminalise the gay community for partaking in that in some way. So the gay community is held to strange standards. I don't know why. Actually, I do know why. It's because we are unlike... Sorry, thank you, I'm in my stride. Unlike other minorities, we don't have our own place. We don't have our own geography or community. We arise in the bosom of our enemies, as it were. We don't have a community to settle back on except the one we create for ourselves. And so we are, for that very same reason, not well understood. And so people approach us in a different way to the way they approach other minorities. And it's a mistaken way. It's a way in which they expect more from us than they have any right to expect. These unspoken attitudes arise from the fact that they, as I say, expect us all to be moral philosophers. Yes, Jim?
Do you think the fact that people in the gay community have images of, say, being effeminate accelerates or slows down the attempts to get rights?
Okay, because of that, I'm going to skip right to my the section I had, what this is really about and what this speech is all really about. It's about political expediency, is what it's all really about. Niall has no real problem with midgets and gimp suits. He just realises that they're not politically expedient. And that's perfectly correct. Nobody is going to argue with that. But the reason why it's not politically expedient is because people are stupid. I think, my honest opinion, is that this debate shouldn't be about gay rights. The real important thing here is the midget in the gimp suit. He is what it's all about. He is us 20 years from now. He is the person who benefits from, no thank you, the wisdom, the lessons learned over centuries of struggle. He is the other. He is the queer. I know this is the word that the Senator dislikes, but it has a lot of sophisticated meaning behind it. And I think that sophisticated thought, that moral wisdom, is what is really important in all of this. It would be dishonest of us to shirk that responsibility, to abandon these long and hard-learned lessons. You see, human morality is extremely elastic. It's so elastic that it allows people to expand their moral horizons just to the point where it becomes a snug fit for them, not to its logical conclusion. And the logical conclusion for us is the midget and the gimp man. The moderate gay lifestyle that we would all like to be able to access is only available to us because there were these outrageous, transgressive queers who have gone before. The velvet louches of yesteryear, the towering trannies of Stonewall, the brazier-burning dykes and archipluvian ladyboys, their courageous and sometimes reckless cultural shock and awe carved out this safe, picket-fenced domain of quotidian queerness in which you now sit and hurl abuse at the freaks and misfits who still elect to wander and roam free in the shifting wilderness without. I think that if we were to continue the trajectory of the queer movement, of the gay movement, we'll end up all being midgets and gimp masks, and that would be a good thing. Thank you.
We now, ladies and gentlemen, have another distinguished and well-known to you guest, Mr. Joko Gorm, to speak in the competition.
Chairman, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College, Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. Sodom was destroyed by God for a reason. The sin of sodomy. Gomorrah was destroyed by God for a more ambiguous sin, honorary. But I'm certain that it had something to do with a bunch of Nancy boys in dresses upsetting the good Lord. As many of my fellow fundamentalists believe the Bible does not err when it tells us that it made Adam and Eve. It also tells us that there was a serpent in the garden. And whilst the previous speaker was most complimentary about his prior speaker, I cannot say that I can be complimentary about Mr. Hodson. As you well know, the ad hominem attack is my favourite of dealing with what can only be described as the trite misinformation that Mr. Hodson chooses to trot out. Flamboyance, sir, is a huge flaw of your character. And to say that you have done your side of the argument no good whatsoever by your observations about lesbians with their pussies somewhere up the night. Frankly, the points that have been made of the proposition clearly indicate that the image portrayed by those who would represent gay people in all of their sin, these are things that are off-putting to the vast majority of normal straight people who are loved by God. And I would say that if one is going to stray into the sin of sodomy, then one would have to think perhaps that this negative image perpetuated by those who support the sinner would in fact have a educative and a negatively educative impact upon those considering wandering into sin. That, I think, would make many a young man think twice. I can safely say that I know how many young men feel. And frankly, many of the young men have felt very much like myself. So, I do not believe that gimp masks, large or small, or supplied by Marks and Spencer's medium-sized, all are in fact any way to convey to the righteous the position that those who are sodomitically inclined should not be cast into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping, wailing, gnashing of teeth. I would say that if the gay community were truly interested in perpetuating an image that could be described as positive, they would join their fellow citizens on their knees in church and lay down their sins before the great and forgiving masterhood of God. But I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this is not going to happen. It is not going to happen because the same invidious attitude that we see here, exemplified in the question of Mr. Hobson, percolates all of the way through the gay community, a freak show of unparalleled proportions, and that it is possible to even maintain that somehow people can live a quotidian queer lifestyle, that there might be diurnal dykes. That there might be diurnal dykes is offensive to the vast majority of the people of this country, who may well live in countryside somewhere and may well play sports, if they're so inclined, and may well be able to hit a small ball with a stick. But if this is what the good people of this country want, ladies and gentlemen, is it really the case that a small minority of perverts, weirdos, and the outlandishly dressed are in any way going to change the minds of these people? And I should say no. I mean, ultimately speaking, we are this evening in the presence of one of the prime perverts in this country. And somebody who has over the years perverted many things, including justice. Why, this very summer, he indulged in the perversion of justice, using his position to cover up his involvement in a heinous crime. He, ladies and gentlemen, was the cause of the crash between the bus and the Lewis on O'Connell Street because he cycled the wrong way down the street wearing one of those hideous Hawaiian shirts that he insists on flaunting before the sensible people of Ireland's eyes. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think it is quite possible that we will end up in a situation where, because we want to feel good about ourselves and we want to feel liberal, that we will support the idea that really we should be all out there for the gays. But I say no. Do not fall to this temptation. Do not allow the serpent beguile you. At the end of the day, nibbling on fruit has done mankind no good whatsoever. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
And I thought Quentin President died. The next speaker is the third speaker of the opposition, and it is another guest, Mr. Ross Higgins.
Distinguished chairperson, members of the proposition, members of the opposition, ladies and gentlemen, how do you follow that? In thinking about this motion before I came into the room, and I think many of the themes have been repeated, the thing that sprung into my mind instantly was Brenda Power's article in the Times a few weeks ago. And it tied into all of what we've been discussing, that gay pride that happens once a year is a freak show, that drag queens cannot represent the gay community, that they're a disgrace, and if the gay movement wants to be taken seriously in its quest for progressive egalitarian change in this country, these are the wrong spokespersons. My original discipline is history, so I want to put some of this in context and maybe respond to some of what the second proposition speaker said. Why did Pride begin? What was the context? In 1971 was the first Pride in the United Kingdom, and it was 1980 in Dublin. Homosexual was illegal, or the promotion of sodomy in the United Kingdom was still defined as illegal. It was designed to be celebratory. All that gay people and lesbians had seen was images of themselves as being sick, being psychologically damaged, being deviant, being pathosed by organised religion. It was to show that there was a celebratory, wonderful existence to be gay, that you could be out and proud and self-confident. Beyond that, it was about publicity, and the early gay rights activists knew this. There were a small group of people. They wouldn't get press releases out, no one would cover it. The tabloid papers had a taboo about covering homosexuality. They were not going to get meetings with government ministers or be able to lobby. What did they do? They did outrageous things to get in the paper. And yes, Men in Drag achieved this. But they also ran for a year and a half, the Gay Liberation Front in the United Kingdom in the 1970s, a reenactment of Oscar Wilde's trial in the middle of Trafalgar Square once a week. They did anything to get publicity, anything to promote it. And why was that? To let other gay people know they existed, to let them know if they were in rural Kerry or rural Donegal or anywhere across the United Kingdom and Ireland that there were other people like them because they could not get the message out otherwise. Maybe that was easier in some of the large metropolitan places, but I still think even now it's rather difficult. If you're growing up in your 12, 13, 14, 15, somewhere in deep in rural Ireland, you may not see any images or anything that would relate you to being a gay identity, except maybe coverage on the 6-1 News of Pride in Dublin once, or a piece in a broadsheet newspaper. And that publicity is still important. And in response to whether it should be as diverse and colourful as it is, I think we're going through tough times. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of marches in the next while. I think I'd prefer not to march down, as Brandon Power seems to think we should, in suits from O'Connell Street to Dáil Éireann, because I think we'll be mistaken for SIP2 or worse youth defence. And I can't take that brush. Ronan hit on the head of this argument, and Niall brought it up too. This is about political expediency, but I think it's about more than that. I think it's about censorship more than anything else. It's about freedom of speech. It's about, do we live in a pluralistic, open, tolerant society where all views, irrespective of where they come in a community, can be recognised and valued, or do we live in 1950s Catholic Ireland? I know which one I want to live in. And the argument implicitly from Brenda Power and the others is that we should self-censor. Why? And the real crux of this one happens to be drag queens. They're the ones that put in the media all the time. Well, drag queens are a part of our community. Some people may not like that, but the dogs on the street know that bingo happens in the George on a Sunday night and there are drag queens on it. They see Shirley Temple Bar with her own RTE television show. If this is a day to celebrate the diversity and richness of our community, everyone who is part of it should be able to turn up. That includes the drag queens. And I want to respond to some points Niall made on Pride. He said that only this certain number turned up and this is an unrealistic figure. That was the Garda estimate. It was not the Dublin Pride's estimate. Dublin Pride is open and democratic. It's the only membership-based organisation in the gay community. I accept Gay and Lesbian Equality Network and the board of GCN, which I sat on, are not open membership bodies, and it's democratic. Anyone who wants to get involved can, and anyone who wants to turn up at Pride can. That's because history is made by those who turn up. No, thank you. I see someone else from Dublin Pride wants to correct me on something. It comes back to this. If we are to self-censor, is this the way to gain our fundamental rights? That our spokespersons are not good enough. A woman in a frock or a man in a frock is not good enough to represent us. And Brenda Power picked out specifically Rory O'Neill, who goes by the pseudonym Panty and is a drag queen in Dublin, and said this person cannot be taken seriously to argue for our rights. I want to point out some things about Rory O'Neill. He's an entrepreneur. He runs his own bar in the city. He writes and performs theatre in the Fringe Festival and others. He speaks out on issues he cares about as a member of civil society. And as part of his drag work, he promotes a festival called Alternative Miss Ireland once a year that raises thousands upon thousands of euros for a charity known as Open Heart House, which cares for people who are people with AIDS or HIV. From my perspective, he uses his talents, unusual that they may be to some, to better himself and his community. From my perspective, that is not the definition of a stereotype, that is the definition of a role model. You didn't have to, but thank you, Ronan. The next point about that is if you accept Brenda Power's argument that we won't, our agenda, this homosexual agenda, will not be taken seriously if we don't have serious spokespersons. I don't think the gay community has a narrow sectarian agenda that no one can agree with. Things that we've been campaigning on recently, or that organisations have been campaigning on, bullying in schools. I don't think anyone can say we want a school system where bullying is allowed, and plenty of people are subjected to homophobic bullying who aren't gay. I don't think any of us have a vested interest in a school system that alienates or excludes anyone for any criteria. What do our Glen campaigning on now? They're campaigning on better treatment for people with HIV and AIDS and better promotion of safe sex. I don't think that's a narrow sectarian issue for the gay community. I think that's an issue for everyone. And then civil marriage. I don't believe it's a narrow sectarian thing in Irish society that no one wants to see progressive and positive egalitarian change. I also resent the insinuation that in order to gain our rights,
we should be respectable homosexuals. That in order to be granted the right to marriage, you should not display anything flamboyant, out there, or a bit outre. I want to have the right to civil marriage and equality before the law as a citizen, not because I'm a good homosexual, as everyone should have those rights as equal citizens. No, thank you. I've tried to give a little bit of context about the history of Pride, why it is, how it has developed, and why those traditions are there. I think the stereotypes of the people who have become spokespersons, not necessarily of their own volition for our community, are false, they're misleading, and they're insulting. And I think the community and the gay organisations that represent it have a progressive, broad, wide agenda that anyone could be supportive of in this society, and I think those arguments can be made irrespective of the bigotry of some columnists in the Times. I beg to propose. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is the fourth speaker of this proposition, and it is Kira Phillips.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Ronan stood up here and asked us, why is it that here at this debate we are calling for the gay community to be a bunch of enlightened philosophers? First, I'd like to remind Ronan that, as this is the HIST, founded by Edmund Burke, it's unsurprising that we're expecting philosophers to be here. It's at the field that you find no philosophers, just the word philosophy thrown in by a lot of famous people for no apparent reason. So I will be dealing with essentially 2 points. I will be talking about the LGBT community. I will be talking about gay pride. Now, one thing that I feel that needs to be said now, although I'm not a fan of the LGBT, as you may notice very quickly as I move into my speech, is that last year when Cormac, our welfare officer, was the head of the LGBT, they celebrated their 25th anniversary. Now this means that they were established before the esteemed chair tonight had homosexuality decriminalised. And if you wouldn't mind, I think we should take an instant to applaud them for their efforts in this. And now on to the substance of my speech, why I don't like those card-carrying gays. As Niall already brought up in his speech, there is a large degree of stereotypes, talking about, you know, the GAA player coming out and, oh, he's a gay man and he plays GAA. I mean, people were unsurprised when who played hockey and camogie and golf, came out. I don't know, it may be a matter of equal rights, who knows? I think in this debate, actually, it's very interesting if we view this as a microcosm of the issues, because so far we've had 4 speakers, and I'm the first woman here to speak. I'm going to be followed by another woman speaking on the other side with a matching jumper. Apparently, female gays have some sort of weird uniform going on. I don't know what that's about, but that's the reality. I feel that since this is the 40th anniversary of Stonewall, it's very interesting to see the evolution of gay rights, and there has been a relatively fundamental shift in my opinion. I think when the LGBT was originally set up, it did provide this terrific safe haven for people to discover who it was they were and to do so in a safe environment. But I feel that in recent times it's moved on to becoming something about stereotypes, and, you know, gay men are camp, as Ronan informed us, and women are dressing like truck drivers and whatnot, and generally being quite frightening. Not always true, but often true in terms of the stereotypes. And I think this is quite a frightening thing. I mean, as Niall said, there is a need for these persons to provide this atmosphere. I mean, during Rainbow Week, which, although makes as much sense as having Straight Week, there are a number of talks provided for people to try and understand what it is to be gay and come to terms with their sexuality. But what we find a lot in LGBTs is that there is this theme of sexuality instead of personality, that people are often congregated together on the basis of their sexual identity rather than personal identities. And you might ask, why is that any less legitimate than a bunch of pompous people gathering around to find particular structured ways to argue with each other on a weekly basis? But the reason why often this is deemed strange is that, you know, to get together to discuss the fact that you're distinguished from other people on the basis of your attraction to the same sex is something I find that's quite odd. And what happens with this, and the stereotypes that's perpetuated, is what Ronan touched on in terms of conformity and why is it wrong to conform. often what you find is there's this sort of phenomenon of the homogenous homos, wherein people like Niall get refused entry to a gay bar because he doesn't look gay enough. I remember the first time I went to a gay bar, I thought there was going to be some sort of weird quiz to tell if you were gay or something, like, you know, they were going to ask you for names of, like, women who were appropriate, say, you know, women list off, you know, Angelina Jolie, Ellen DeGeneres, and Rosie O'Donnell or someone like that, or occasionally Drew Barrymore. So you can show that you're, you know, the inside lingo and whatnot. I mean, there was a phenomenon in the 1920s in the States when the speakeasies evolved against the prohibition in America, where there were ones which were exclusively gay, and unless you looked gay, you couldn't get in. And in this way, the gay community does this weird thing wherein, despite being alternative and attempting to fight against heterosexual norms, they recreate their gender roles and their norms within them, where you have the butch and you have the bitchin' relationship. I mean, I don't see that there's a problem for men being camp any more than I see the further need for there to be a man to be camp if the man happens to have, like, unscrupulously good dress sense, as Ronan has, and a genuine ability to tie a dicky bow, unlike most of the people on a Thursday night, sadly, then that's not a problem. But I think that where you have people who are badly dressed, I think there should be a call for, you know, badly dressed gay men to be equally respected, and women who are bad at DIY and like other women to be treated with respect. But one of the people, in terms of the LGBT, who are often, I think, overlooked is the bisexual people. Bisexual people, when you talk about the LGBT movement, are often given this negative stereotype that they're people who are on their fence, they're not really sure what they want, or they're too chicken to say, sorry, I'm gay, or else they're just plain greedy. But that's not the reality. People are entitled to be, there's no reason why people can't be attracted to both sexes. There is no reason why people can't be attracted to both sexes. Like, people think that bisexuality is some sort of myth for either greedy people or really cowardly people. These people should be given as much recognition as others. Moving swiftly on, Ross talked about the GLF, and when we're talking about LGBTs and gay societies, there is an alternative gay society. We call them the Philosophical Society, and last year... for getting some sense of visibility, they won in the CSU Awards, they won the best event for the trials of Oscar Wilde, and they won it nationally. So, you know, there are alternatives. Just throwing it out there. Now, quickly, problems with gay pride. Firstly, there is the fact that it tends to bring out extremes of the stereotypes. And if a person is only exposed to this in terms of what is gay, then there will be obviously some negative connotations, which happens when you put in any extremes of any particular group in society in any way or shape or form. I mean, there is also the fact that, you know, that gay pride is one day where people get to be gay. What I put to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that we take the other 364 days back. There is no reason we should only, you know, be allowed to be gay on one day. If you're walking down the street and you want to hold your girlfriend's hand or your boyfriend's hand, then do so. And if you're someone who likes to wear tweed as opposed to glitter, fine. So what if you're a little bit conservative? I have a problem where you have Republicans in the States at gay pride being booed because of the fact that they're Republicans. And in terms of the problem with perhaps drag queens as spokespersons, I mean, I don't particularly have a problem with it. Speaking of the film, our club night is tonight. It's the Rocky Horror Picture Night. So if you're free after the reception, don't be cross-dressing with the film. So on the grounds that the LGBT has had its time, but needs to refocus on its initial goals, the fact that gay pride does perpetuate extreme stereotypes, I beg to propose a motion.
The next speaker is the fourth opposition speaker and the final speaker on the printed list, but I gather we have some volunteers from the audience, and I now call on Ms. Niamh Wayloyd.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. Holding your girlfriend or your boyfriend's hand in the street, should not have to be a political act, as Kira suggested. It shouldn't have to be an act of reclaiming the other 364 days. Kissing in the street should not have to be a political act. Marrying the person that you are in love with should not have to be a political act. A drag queen is not a bad example. A drag queen is a guy who likes to dress in women's clothing. And I don't think that he should have to do charity work just to justify that. Gay people are gay people. Going to the George means that you are more likely to score someone who has compatible tastes with your own. These things are not political acts, no thank you. And I think what we've gotten from the proposition, and the issue I have with the proposition, is that they are yet again, on another level, trying to politicise the decisions that gay individuals make. But how the majority of them have justified it to themselves, it's like, it's grand, I'm gay too, and I'm saying it, so don't worry. That is not good enough. Just because the pressure is internally applied does not mean it's any better. I would like to live in a society where not every decision a gay person makes is a political decision. I get it that it's tough for the kid in Leitrim having trouble coming out of the closet. That doesn't mean that every gay person in the country has to consider him with every decision that they make. And that is the situation as it stands, and that is what we've heard from the proposition, because we've heard that gay people are always represented. And so what's the issue, more appropriate to this debate? It's that I want the gay community to stop being a homogenous sexuality. No two sexualities are the same. No two people, straight or gay or anything else, have the same sexuality. And yet, there is an attempt to turn this into an absolutely community-based and collective-based group of people. That necessarily leads to stereotyping. What I would like is that gay people can be individuals, can be gay individuals. And yes, they can seek support in who they are from that community, but that community should not decide who they are. So with particular regard to the issue that has come up time and time again, and that's the Gay Pride Parade. As a previous speaker said, we have to acknowledge that the Gay Pride Parade did start out as a means of giving a voice to people who were otherwise paralysed and unable to speak. And I'm willing to agree with Niall that yes, that has changed. Before the Gay Pride Parade was speaking in a vacuum, that vacuum no longer exists. They are not the only gays that we can see. But what I would say to those people who have an issue with being represented that way is that you can represent yourself another way. People in the Gay Pride Parade are acting for themselves. They are displaying their own sexuality. You do not have to conform to that. You do not have to be associated with that. So if you have an issue with the Gay Pride Parade, you can do something to reappropriate your own sexuality. And it's a very simple method. You can be yourself. You can be yourself and be a homosexual. And I don't mean this, as I've said, in a political way. It makes sense to live in such a way that you can accept yourself and you can be accepted, no thank you, by others as a gay person and as a person anyway. Because yes, things like gay pride, marches and protests and petitions, they do achieve and they have achieved political and legislative change. But what changes, for want of a better term, people's hearts and minds is when they know someone who's gay, is when their children or their neighbours or their colleagues or their friends are gay, and they're forced with recognising that they're not degenerate, they're not lecherous, they're not actually too fabulous for words, they are just people. Jerry.
So you mean that people need their friends who are gay to correct the negative the negative stereotype which the gay community has perpetuated?
The gay community didn't actually create the negative stereotype. That was some other people. That was, the conservative community. That was the people who, since time immemorial, apart from the Greeks, have said that being gay is wrong. what we have here is we have a bit of a vicious cycle where if people say that being gay is wrong and then gay people act like gay people, it's like you're perpetuating the view that being gay is wrong. That's not necessarily true. What I do think is that when people know a gay person, and everyone in theory does know a gay person, because there are that many of them, that is when their views change. That's when their views are forced to change. And that's when it stops being political. That's when it stops being other people. And that's when you can't be bigoted anymore. So I think every individual gay person should possibly come out, though I don't think they have responsibility to do so. I think they shouldn't bitch about how other people are representing them. They should represent themselves as they want to be represented. But ultimately, I think that we have to kind of look at things slightly differently. Because there's been an impression that was enhanced by Ger there, that it's the gay people's fault. That is untrue. I believe that the gay people in this country are still the victims. And I'm willing to say that if I make an example of our chair, there are people who hate Senator Norris because of who he is, because of the way he lives, and because of the legislation that he tries to enact. And I mean this with all due respect, because I believe that Senator Norris is one of the finest ambassadors this country has, and one of the finest ambassadors the gay community has internationally. I don't think that Senator Norris should have to change. I think that people in Tipperary and Leitrim and Limerick and Donnybrook and wherever else should be less bigoted. And that brings us back to what Jamie said. Does gay people acting in this way not slow down our moves towards marriage or towards adoption? No, ladies and gentlemen. The fact that there are bigots slows down our movement towards gay marriage or gay adoption. The regressive people slow down that movement. It would be quicker, it would be easier for gay men to man up and impregnate a woman. But they actually don't want to have children with women. They would like to have children with other men whom they love and whom they want to spend their lives with. The gay community does not want to be accepted as something that it is not. The gay community wants to be accepted for what it is. And each individual within that community and within that population, since there seems to be a divide, has a responsibility to portray him or herself as the kind of person that he or she wants to be, and not to look to a stereotype, and not to look to a community. And so I move to oppose.
Order paper, and there are 4 speakers on, and the list is now, I understand, closed. And the first impromptu speaker in the proposition is Mr. Declan Meehan. Declan, you're late.
I am indeed. Imagine, third year. No, I'll wave them, I guess. Okay. Definitely going to regret that. Ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen, first time addressing the Hist, so it's a bit weird, but it's all good. It's an honour to be here. Tonight we've had a lot of speeches, and it's a very mixed debate. People are coming from obviously 2 different sides, but within that there's further division, and my speech will be even less clear again. But what I wanted to say was, we talk of this thing of gay community, and it's kind of applies very loosely, and community itself is obviously an ambiguous and difficult to pin down term. So when we look at it, we're kind of like, oh, the gay community as one whole body, but we never actually say the straight community or the heterosexual community as such. So it's kind of like, within the gay community there's obviously vast diversity, and within that I think we can kind of see from tonight that a lot of us here, or the gay people on my side of the debate, kind of don't like being represented by a minority. So I think that's kind of fair to say. And that minority, I guess, is kind of like the flamboyant, glitzy-witsy, hairdresser, drag queen, gay section of the gay community. And it's kind of like, well, what's the problem with being represented by that? It's not so much that there's a problem being represented by that, a personal problem with it. It's just that you get to choose your representatives, if you know what I mean. So, like, this is, as I said, a random stream of consciousness. But what you have then is you have people who are objecting to this negative image, or what they perceive as a negative image portrayed by this minority within the gay community. So we say that the drag queens are like whatever, perpetuating a negative image. Is it actually negative? It can be construed as negative by the main factions within society, and it's kind of like dismissed as too flamboyant and unacceptable. And it's like, is it a question of, no thank you, Will, is it a question of conformity if we don't have those people as our representatives, or is it actually a question of maturity? We had the gay pride movement, and it was all about making a noise about how different we are and how we have the right to be different. And that difference was our sexuality. So we have that difference, and it is solely our sexuality that we like to sleep with people of the same gender. So now we have that point has been made, that's quite clear, whatever, that we have the right to be different. But now we're saying, as it's been brought up before, people on my side and the other side, that the gay pride movement has become something of a campaign directed toward asserting our rights to be treated the same. So it's kind of like, yes, we're very different based on our sexuality, but now we want to be treated the same. I think that that process itself is kind of a maturity, a move from a young kind of movement to a movement that's more comfortable in the society and setting that it finds itself now. I think that the main basis for that is kind of, if you look at the two things that we were demanding at the time, you want to legalise homosexual sexual acts, and now you want to legalise like legislation to allow for commitment within a relationship, or legislate for same-sex couples to be allowed to raise children, essentially. So that they have both rights of parenthood and responsibility of parenthood to an adopted child. What that suggests to me is, again, a maturity of that process, of the gay rights process, and it's kind of like a move away from just asserting our right to sexuality, and a move towards actually saying, well, actually, we're different from you on the basis of sexuality, but the most important thing is we're the exact same as you because we can, and we have the capacity to love. And that's kind of the basis of it, that it's a maturing process of the move from the sexuality kind of aspect of it to love. Not that love is devoid of sexuality, of course, but that's kind of the way I see it. No, thank you, Will. And the way I kind of see it, and what we need, I think, to reflect that is kind of representatives and our own attitudes within the gay community that actually reflect that kind of maturity to achieve what we want to achieve. In order to achieve what we want to achieve, do we have to like consign the drag queens, etc., to kind of like the back of the crowd, the back of the mob, and say hush, hush, and in sense of political, or for the sake of political expediency, quieten down, kind of? No, but often it might be a bit preferable for the simple fact that it is political expediency. Like, we can say that it's perpetuating a negative image because in our conservative society, that's perceived as negative, as flamboyant and whatever else those people are perceived as. I'm not saying that that's right, but that's the way they're perceived. And it's kind of like, while they are also perhaps campaigning for the same thing, it's much better to do it in a way that's more obviously reflective of what we're trying to achieve now. So we had, who do we have up here? Will, who was up here earlier actually. Will was up here earlier and was telling us about all the great people who are prominent members of, politics and celebrity life, who are gay and who are great role models, and kind of like, show us that there isn't a bad reputation, or that they're not perpetuating a bad reputation. The fact is that these people aren't given as much attention in the media as the people who do perpetuate that negative image. And what I'm saying is that we kind of need to take responsibility onto ourselves to change that ourselves. That's what is perceived as a negative image from that. We need to change that ourselves, and it's up to us. So it's kind of like, if you think of yourself, I know myself and like most of my gay friends are like largely apathetic, not so much apathetic, but certainly inactive in terms of like the gay rights activism. And if you look at like the vast majority of gays that I know, or gay people that I know, aren't active in protesting or going along to LGBT meetings or trying to campaign. And that's a bad thing, because I think that apathy and like inactivism is very bad. I think that it's all on ourselves to kind of change that. And if while I'm saying that there kind of is this kind of minority that does perpetuate a negative image of the gay community, it's up to ourselves who think that to actually change that, to engage and to become active and to assert the diversity within the group. So basically, what I'm saying is, in a very roundabout way, that there's been a move from what the gay rights movement was decades ago to what it is now, and we need like a more inclusive and a more engaging participation from all ranges of the gay spectrum, if you like. So at the minute, I think it is the gay community as media perceives it and as it is portrayed to society, because it's a small minority who are actually active, that perpetuates a negative image, and we need to overcome that ourselves by engaging and becoming active. Thank you and sorry. Cheers.
And the first impromptu speaker of the opposition is Mr. David Walsh.
David, you are a baby. Would you like to?
Yes.
Would you like to accept your maiden's rights, which basically means?
I have no idea what that means.
Okay, well, I will explain. If your maiden's rights are basically that, in the middle of the debate, after the first bell, you don't have to take a point of information. If you accept that, then you won't have to take a point of information. But if you reject it, as Declan did, you get a round of applause.
So, explain to me exactly what the difference is, because I don't have to take points of information anyway if I don't want to, right? Oh, the hell with it. I'll waive my rights. Ladies and gentlemen, being an American, I will spare you the honorifics, because also as a maiden, I don't know them, and I'm trying to portray myself in a very egalitarian manner. I'm getting up here today for really 3 reasons. 1, I completely botched my maidens round yesterday, and so kind of want to make up for that. 2, how often do you get a chance to get up and address a senator? I mean, this truly is an honor, sir, and I'm just thrilled to be able to do it. And 3, I do have 1 or 2 minor points that I want to make, and it'll be very, like real points. It'll be very, very brief. 1, I want to address you, sir, because I think that you made an excellent point about sodomy. But I just wanted to further explore this notion of sodomy, because because, sir, sodomy, historically speaking, does not simply mean gay sex. It means any type of sex that is not vaginal intercourse. So, sir, by that definition, we're all pretty much going to hell. So I'll see you there. You meet the most interesting people in hell, it has to be said. The second point I wanted to make is somewhat more far more serious, actually. I just wanted to relay an anecdote. At Smith College, I'm going to take you back to the dark days before Stonewall, before the gay rights movement as such really began, to Smith College in Massachusetts, in the United States, in 1960. It was either 1959 or 1960, where 2 English professors, were summarily dismissed from their positions after it was found out they were homosexual. And this was found out actually by a very interesting way. Smith's College was an all-girls school. These 2 professors were, I believe, the only faculty members that were not sleeping with their students. I'm being perfectly serious here. It was found in their apartments, in their respective apartments, several gay magazines, which were brought out in public and described as pornographic. I've actually seen them. By modern standards, they're not pornographic. They're more, yes, I admit I've seen them. Yes, but no, I'm being perfectly serious. By modern standards, they're not pornographic. They're actually more in the Greco-Roman tradition than modern pornography. And yet, even with this relatively innocuous material, these men And despite being highly respected in their fields and by their students, these men were hounded as perverts, as degenerates, as people unfit to live with in decent society. And I think this is what's being directed at, what was the turn of phrase? The midget with the gimp mask and all this other fetishistic stuff, which is not necessarily limited to the gay community, it has to be said. There are plenty of straight people that have strange kinks. I don't know if this is published in Ireland, but I would encourage any of you to read Savage Love. It's a column by an American sex columnist. It is actually gay, but he deals with people who have strange turn-ons. And again, it's a more inclusive thing. And what was I talking about? You see, I'm vamping a little bit here, ladies and gentlemen, so you'll have to bear with me. Right. I was talking about I'll take that point of information. I don't care. Anyway, I was talking about defining deviancy, right? And these men, despite being in, I suppose, what we would say normative relationships today, were hounded as perverts. And this is what is happening with other people freely expressing their sexuality today. I am grateful that we live in a society, and by we, again, I'm not Irish, I'm not an Irish citizen, but we in the Western world generally. Let's give a round of applause for the West. It's the best hemisphere. I am grateful we live in a society where people are free to express their sexuality, whatever it may be, gay, straight, transgender, with leather whips or without leather whips, the pink fuzzy handcuffs. I could go on. But I will simply close in saying that as in the 1950s, certain people were considered degenerates, these people are being considered degenerates today, and it is not, it will not be so 20 years from now. Thank you.
The second impromptu speaker of the proposition is Mr. Ger Henderson.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College of Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to talk about a few things. First of all, representation. So we've heard that there are some prominent drag queens or prominent flamboyant gays out there representing the gay community. And I say fine. But if you were to ask the general population, would you vote for someone, say, running for the Dáil who was a drag queen? They'd probably get a no, right? General population doesn't think that a drag queen is representative of them. Why is it that the general population has the right to refuse that a drag queen, right now, to refuse that a drag queen could represent them? But for the gay community, because that drag queen is prominent, and because there are no elections for the gay community, the drag queen says, look, I'm more flamboyant, I'll get in the paper, so now I represent the gay community. Why is that fair to the general, the gay in the street who is in no way, who is as similar to that drag queen as someone from the general population is to the drag queen? Why is that fair? No, thank you, not this stage. We've been asked why someone can, how is it that someone could be a negative stereotype just by being out there, just by going in a gay pride march? Well, when taxi drivers go on strike all the time or protest all the time, general population thinks those taxi drivers, they're annoying. When they go and they're trying to get in the paper, people are allowed to form opinions about them, be that positive or negative. If your friend is gay and he does something bad, then that's okay. He does something which may be negative. Does that make the world think that gays are negative in some way? No. But when they go into the paper and say, look at me, I am a gimp in a mask, or we are doing something which for now society isn't cool with, then yes, that's kind of negative. No, thank you. How is it that you can get rights? How is it you can get equality by telling the world, we're the same as you,
by showing the world that you're completely different to them, by showing that we are radical, we are different to society. How does that get you rights? Why is it? No, thank you. Why is it that, I think that we should live in a world where we're all equal, and this just doesn't get us that way. So, yes, gays needed to get rights to be gay back in the day. But now, we don't need a society where there are LGBT officers, where there are women's officers. We just need people to have equality, full stop, without recognising that gays need someone to speak up for them because of the discrimination. Because there isn't mainstream discrimination against gays, okay? No, thank you, right. There isn't, right? For marriage, society is... No, I'm sorry. Society is determined that marriage should be between two people. They don't have to even be straight people, they just have to be two people, one man, one woman. That's not a discrimination against people who want to have sex with people of the same gender, okay? It's not. Society, you can't go on RTE and say that gay and portray a negative stereotype of gays. The only people who do and who can get away with portraying negative stereotypes of gays are gay people, right? Our famous gay people, look, we can do this funny sketch because we're gay. If a straight guy does it, people write into the Irish Times, oh my God, I feel oppressed, right? So society recognises that gay people can do things more flamboyant than the straight people can. But gay people can make a negative stereotype of gay people, and mainstream society can't. Therefore, mainstream society is pretty much okay with the gay community. The question is, does a gay pride march with drag queens and does it make it easier for someone to come out to their friends in their society? No, it doesn't. And for those reasons, I'm going to oppose.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society. This speech will be very impromptu, as it was simply to give Ger Hennessy a foil for his own speech. And I am very glad that I have done so, because I disagree violently with everything that Ger Hennessy had to say on the topic. So I'm glad to be able to have the chance to voice those opinions. Essentially, I think that the main argument that Ger Hennessy brought up was that if you want to be treated like straight people, you should act like straight people. And I would say we don't want to be treated like straight people. We want straight people to be treated like everyone else, and we want gay people to be treated like everyone else. And in order to do that, we have to accept the more flamboyant aspects of the homosexual community, and we have to accept that they want to be out there and speak, and they want to be out there and protest as well, because they are also people who deserve to be treated the same as everyone else. And they are a facet of the homosexual community. And as long as they are a facet of the homosexual community, they should be allowed to march on the Pride Parade. I think everyone here has been focusing on what the gay community has been doing in order to perpetuate the negative stereotype, what all the gay people have been doing at the Gay Pride Parade. I'd like to focus a little bit on the other elements of the Gay Pride Parade, apart from, trannies and drag queens and all this kind of nonsense, and midgets and gimp masks and all this kind of ridiculous stuff. Because what we're doing there is we're subscribing to the I know it's going to be still hilarious, the image in my head.
The top of the drag queen.
I thought the top had as well. Okay, but focusing on the point. Getting back to it. Is that what we're subscribing to here is the media or the human idea of portraying the stereotype. When we talk about trannies and drag queens and dwarfs and gimp masks, we are also focusing on the more flamboyant and the more extreme elements of the Gay Pride Parade. I have been at Gay Pride Parades in here and in New York, and there are also people who are just walking and while being normal people. And we, ourselves, and the media that we, buy into, are the ones who are perpetuating the negative stereotype as they believe. They're the ones who are perpetuating the extreme elements. I would like to point out that it is the media that is perpetuating the extreme elements of the gay community, and those extreme elements are not negative stereotypes. Those extreme elements are real people who choose to stand up, shoulder to shoulder with other real people who are voicing their opinion that being gay is okay, and be portrayed as that, and asked to be accepted, and asked to be, treated like everyone else, and to have everyone else treated like them. So I think it's appalling that an awful lot of the people on the proposition have asked gay people to act straight. I think we should be focusing on the fact that we should be asking straight people to be treated like everyone else. And we shouldn't keep saying, like, equality... one moment. We shouldn't keep saying that equality is being treated like straight people. We should say that equality is everyone being treated the same. Colin.
Do you think the fact that
There is an idea.
It's fine.
Do you think the fact that there is an idea that there is a gay way to act makes it harder for some people to come out when they know they don't fit into that stereotype?
I think that the point is that the gay way to act isn't a gay thing. That the gay way to act is one of many different ways that a gay person can act. And the more we have a whole host of different people acting in a whole host of different ways, and the more we have media portraying each and every part of those aspects, the more you realise that it's a very diverse area. And I think we should stop selling our soul down the river in order to make it more easy for people in Leitrim to come out, as Niamh said. We have been making progress. Poor Leitrim. We have been making progress after the last number of years. I think that we are still making progress. I think it's potentially slow progress. I don't think we should sell ourselves in order to make that progress any quicker. And I don't think it will do us any good in the long run, because eventually there'll be some chap in Leitrim, I say eventually, there might be already, who wants to be a drag queen. And they should also be allowed to, express that desire. And they should also know that there are people out there who will accept them as well. So that was my very impromptu speech, and I thank you all very much.
Motion to the floor, and I'm very happy so to do. But just to remind you, the motion is that this House believes that the gay community perpetuates a negative stereotype. May I have those in favour? Yay! Those against? Nay! No. I think the nays have.
Your turn for today, the last leader.
Well, I understand there's now my opportunity to say a few words, and I'm very happy indeed to do so. Although I'm a little bit uneasy, and my uneasiness springs from the fact that for the first time in my life I'm beginning to feel that I'm in a majority. I've always luxuriated in being a minority. I think I'm a member of virtually every minority that exists in this country. I'm Anglican, half English, but on the other side from a very old Gaelic Irish family. Went to this place, which was certainly a minority when I was here. And recently I've begun to sense that the ideas that were so revolutionary 40 years ago when we started off have now been accepted. And I'm terrified that we've been co-opted to the establishment. And that's why I was so glad that there were discordant voices here today. Although even with that, I felt, with the exception of one speaker, and I do hope that you'll forgive me for referring to his sexuality. I have no gaydar, whatever. I never have had. But I did feel that virtually all of the speakers were fairies of one kind or another. Those were teetering on the edge. With the single exception of Mr. Ger Hennessy. And if I'm wrong, then I do apologise too. But it's not an insult, dear listeners, to be accused of heterosexuality. Some of my best friends. This was genuinely such a wonderful debate. I mean, there was sparkling and brilliant wit, there was passionate advocacy, there were really serious issues raised, and there were even some dull moments. So in fact, you represent the entire spectrum of human behaviour, as I think the gay community does. I don't think there's all that much difference, except in sexual practice, but circumstances led to the creation of a gay community of which I was extremely proud. In the very early days, we had arguments and dissension about whether or not there was such a thing as a gay community. All argued within the gay community. There were lots of people, gay people, who said there simply was not. But what really brought out the existence of a gay community was the advent of acquired immunity deficiency syndrome. And I was extremely proud of the way in which the gay community responded to that political challenge. However, as I get old, I'm kind of superannuated fairy, and I'm finding it rather difficult to dredge up new angles to this thing. After all, I've been droning on about it for 40 years, so it is remarkably difficult. But I occasionally manage to find one or two, and particularly regarding the current political developments, about which, with your indulgence, I'll say a little in a while. But it is slightly dreary to be always asked to chair or to participate in gates about boogery. Because, I mean, I ache to have been chair when Chomsky is here this day next week. And I tell you why. Because my wonderful faceless ex, Ezra Yitzhak Nawi, whose pathological free distribution of his favours eventually drove me out of his personal life. But I'm still absolutely devoted to him. I will love him to the day I die. And he really genuinely is a hero. And I was put up for an award in the gay community. I was abroad in Cyprus, and I telephoned Tony Walsh, the great DJ from the old days in the Hirschfeld Centre and subsequently, and I said to him, look, I've heard this. If anything happens, would you accept this but dedicate it to Ezra? Because Ezra is an Iraqi Jew, born in Israel, a Sabra. He has been shot, stabbed, and imprisoned for the crime of reaching out across his own cultural preconceptions to assist the downtrodden Palestinian subsistence farmers in the village around South Hebron. And last week, he was sentenced in an absolute travesty of justice, sentenced on the basis that he attacked 2 Israeli soldiers. I saw the newsreel film of the event. Ezra is shown taking stones from the Palestinian protesters and saying, no, this is a non-violent protest. He then disappears into the pathetic little hovel to protect an elderly married couple's home against Israeli bulldozers. 2 Israeli soldiers follow him in, obviously clout the shite out of him, and he comes out bewildered and saying, don't hit me. He was accused of assaulting the soldiers, and last week, having been convicted 3 months ago, he was sentenced to 1 month in prison, which doesn't sound very much, to pay the aggressors, the 2 soldiers who beat him, 500 shekels, and on any occasion when he takes part in any demonstration whatever, he goes automatically to jail for 6 months. And that from the country that describes itself as the only and greatest democracy in the Middle East. It's an appalling travesty of justice and a betrayal of the ideals of religion, Judaism, which I hold in great respect and affection. And so I asked that Tony would dedicate this to him, and I'm very glad to say he did. He held up a big sign, and it's on YouTube. And Chomsky is one of the principal people supporting this. There's a petition of over 100,000 people. That is the kind of role model that I think young gay people are entitled to have. And I think the same about Donald Logue Cusack. I think it was marvellous. Of course it is ridiculous that people assumed that there were no gay people in sport. Of course there were. But he chose to approach it in a very dignified way. He controlled the whole circumstance in the same way that he controlled his game of hurling. And he was adventurous, the same way that he had with the short puck out and all the rest of it. He was able to really determine the way his publicity would go. That took not just courage, it took very considerable intelligence. That will change lives of young people. And I think that is terribly important. Same Stephen Gately. Stephen Gately was driven out of the closet by trashy tabloid newspapers. And I thought it was remarkable and splendid the way in which the band surrounded and cherished not only his blood family, but also his partner. But I thought it was very regrettable, and I said it. Nobody listened. I said it on the radio, I said it in the House, that I thought it regressive, that not one single one of the official statements by political or social leaders mentioned his legally contracted spouse. I mean, that wouldn't happen in any other relationship. And I remember, it must be 30 years ago, when the great actor Micheál Mac Liammóir died, and his partner Hilton Edwards, who was a very talented theatre director, was bereft. And that great and gallant gentleman, the late President Carúil O'Dowley, walked across the grave to Hilton Edwards, shook his hand, and said, "I'm sorry for your trouble, Hilton." That was shown on television. Every single person in Ireland knew what that was. That is the traditional Gaelic greeting to the bereaved spouse. And the President of Ireland did that 30 years ago, and our government didn't have the balls to do it 3 weeks ago. I think that's a pity, and I think we have to put that into the balance. Now, this debate, the illustration, very funny. Bruno. I saw the film. I thought it was hysterically funny. It was all based, as far as I could make out, on one visual joke from very old gay porno movies. So it wasn't entirely representative of the gay community. After all, it was made by and acted in by a rampant heterosexual. And I doubt very much if people would take the image of the heterosexual community from a gay porno star, or whatever you like to call it. But it's funny. It's entertaining. I thought it was absolutely hysterical. It went on slightly too long, as I do, but it was still very entertaining. Now, there is a problem with stereotyping. There was a rather silly article by Brenda Power. It wasn't quite as vicious as, for example, Jan Moore's piece in the Mail, but it was just misguided, stupid, silly, misinformed. I think we have to, rather than screaming in anguish all the time, we should patronise these people who are so stupid. And I mean, when he says, homosexuals are entirely free to marry, they just can't marry anyone of the same sex, how can you deal with such irredeemable stupidity and ignorance? You just have to mock it and laugh at it. But I did think it was offensive that she chose to deride panty. Now, I'm old-fashioned and rather conservative, and I'm not over-enthusiastic about the usual run-of-the-mill drag queens. I mean, they tend to be rather amateur in their thespian qualities, unlike Mr. O'Gorman, who is quite superb. But they tend to be also extraordinarily vulgar and coarse, and they get their laughs simply by being hurtful and coarse. I happen to know Panty. And Panty is a man of extraordinary, rapier-sharp intelligence and a very good political instinct. And I think anybody who cannot deal with the ideas, because they come from somebody who is beautifully made up, in an elegant, magnificent gown made by him/herself, is a bloody fool, because it's about ideas. And if you allow the barrier of a piece of fabric to occlude your mind, then I think you're simply not fit to be a member of the College Historical Society. With regard to the parade itself, Gay Pride Parade, I was Marshal of it a couple of years ago, so of course I'm going to be in support of it. It was an enormous honour, immense fun, and I had no problem with the drag queens and all the rest of it. Even a particular party who turned up as usual every year, dressed as a nurse with plastic tits and his leathery old balls sticking out behind. I kind of turned away and put up with it. And I was put in a gold-sprayed Morris Minor with a rainbow umbrella, which I greatly enjoyed. And I had a three-piece suit as well, just to confuse the punters. And we shot off down O'Connell Street. We got stuck. The car broke down on O'Connell Bridge. And three hefty and beautiful young men exercised their muscle power pushing me. And that was such a thrill. That was absolutely worth it. But as we were stopped on the island, there was a rather withered old couple, a man and a woman, and he had an old trilby hat and a sour puss, and the wife was dressed, I suppose, for golf, in a set of trousers, and he looked into the car and he said, "Why aren't you fucking pervert, why aren't you wearing a skirt?" And I said, "I think, sir, that's a question you should properly address to the woman I assume to be your wife." I don't think there were 8,000 or 12,000. I think there were probably about 5,000 that year. It grew exponentially after I was the chair, or whatever, whatever they call it, the Grand Marshal. And I have to say, if this year it was either 8,000 or 12,000, I think that's bloody fantastic. I mean, I've seen marches about incredibly serious social issues that mustered 500, and the newspapers reported them. So I think well done. And if you don't like the complexion of the march, get involved. If there aren't enough guys in suits or girls in skirts, great, get all your pals. Don't sit on the edge and bellyache. Get bloody well involved. And don't blame the organisers of Pride. Tell them you'd like a more representative thing, and you'd like them take a whack at the media for everlastingly concentrating their photographs exclusively upon the most flamboyant. And why do they do that only with the gay community? I think there's a question to be asked there about that. But it is, I think, a remarkable tribute to the organising powers of people. Now, just moving on very quickly, with regard to the gay sock, I remember that 25 years ago, when the first gay sock, before that we had other organisations, but the first gay sock, the really significant thing about that was there was only one gay member of the first committee, or whatever they called it. All the rest were made up of the officers of the Students' Union, who were heterosexual. That was fantastic. That's the kind of bridge that politically we need to build. You know, we need to accept that gay rights are a part of human rights. They're not the whole of human rights, they are the part of human rights, and we debate about the emphasis and all the rest of it, but we should be moving forward as a community. I mean, I can assure you, I wasn't elected only by the 10% of the electorate that are gay. In fact, quite a lot of them told me very proudly they voted for some of the other candidates to show that they weren't gay. You know, I've never understood the logic, and I regretted their foolish choice not to vote for the best candidate. But on the other hand, this is what they did. So I don't want to be, I cannot spend 90% of my time representing 10% of the people. And I like to be involved in imaginative ideas about the economy, moving the Abbey into the GPO, stirring up a bit of controversy about that. I like doing that. And not always, I mean, that means when I speak on the gay issue, as I do from time to time, particularly with regard to the situation in Iran and so on, then I'm listened. Then I'm listened to. And yes, I was very critical of the American administration. I make no bones about it. And I'll tell you this, I would have booed the hell at the gay bloody Republicans, not because they were gay, not just because they said they were Republican, but because they put into office a mass murdering moral imbecile called George Bush. And I will always boo them. Finally, I was walking home last night from the office about 8 o'clock in the evening. I just managed to hit 98 FM, and I don't know if any of you heard it. There was a wonderful debate about the whole idea of gay marriage and civil partnership and so on. It was astonishing, because although the moderator wanted to try and court controversy and quoted all the stuff that David Quinn and the Ionian Institute have stirred up about, that under the new legislation, a photographer who refused to photograph a civil union between persons of the same sex would be sent to jail. Absolute rubbish. It's not in the law, for a start. Number two, if that exists anywhere, it's under the existing equality legislation. It's been there for about 5 or 10 years. I ain't heard of any photographers being so prosecuted. Why? Because fairies have much more intelligence. And what kind of gobshite would prosecute a photographer and try and force them to take photographs of their bloody wedding with a big sour pus on them and deliberately make a professional bollocks of the photographs? I mean, we have more intelligence than that, but it's nasty. Because that went into a committee, and that was intended to legitimise and fan the flames of opposition to try and dismantle the entire bill. But I'm glad to be able to tell you that I have it from a senior source, that the legislation will in fact hit the door in the final part of November. But I understand also that a PR company has been hired by religious elements to do a job on wobbling politicians. And I intend to ask tomorrow for full disclosure as to what this agency is and who hired them, because I think we're entitled to a bit of openness and accountability in this area. And I will be voting against this bill. I spoke with Dermot Ahern today, and he said he was expecting me to support. I said, you have a hope. I have no intention, because there's an enormous gap, and the gap is children. And it's not just, as Brenda talks about, ability to co-parent children, all this. It's existing children. And the situation is, gay people can, under the laws that currently stands, adopt children. But they can adopt them as single people. So if a couple adopts a child and the legally adopting parent dies, then limbo has come back, because that child is going to find itself in a legal limbo, and that is a serious, systematic violation of the rights not of the gay parents, but of the children. And it seems to me astonishing that we've learned so little over the last couple of years, where we've witnessed with horror child abuse from within the centre of authority in this country, the centre of self-styled moral authority, and we are still now embarking as a government upon what I can only call the deliberate abuse of children legislatively because of moral cowardice. So there is fun in this debate, and I'm delighted to be here. It was scintillating, brilliant.
That's it for tonight. In just a minute, we're going to go up for a reception and have a few beers and wines. But just first of all, I'd like to thank the guests. Without guests coming to our debates, we can never have the kind of discussion that we do. So we're really appreciative of that. In the chair, we had Senator David Norris. In proposition, Joe O'Gorman. In opposition, Ross Higgins. And also in opposition, Ronan Hodgson. For anybody interested in